Welcome back to another explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. If you're someone who loves unraveling complicated narratives and seeing how ideas connect, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're acting as neutral cartographers. Our mission to map out a highly complex, fiercely polarized, and honestly fascinating political narrative presented in our source material. Now, we're not here to take sides, but to clearly break down exactly what this analysis is arguing, how it connects the dots, and why it all matters. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for how the source builds its investigative argument. 1. The middle class crisis. 2. Two competing economic visions. 3. Reviving the American system. And 4. Following the campaign money. Starting right off with Section 1, the middle class crisis. The source begins its narrative by identifying what it sees as the root cause of modern youth political anger. To build this foundation, the video uses a quote from J.D. Vance, using his words to establish its first major claim, which is that an entire demographic of Americans is experiencing a profound downward mobility. The argument here is that the intense anger fueling modern political extremes isn't just emerging out of nowhere. It's coming from a broken societal promise. And this brilliantly illustrates the core cause and effect argument about why young, hyper-progressive demographics are turning towards socialism. It's basically a tale of two realities. On one side, you have the promise: get a college degree, gain useful credentials, and achieve upward mobility. On the other side, you have the reality: massive student debt, a lack of practical skills acquired, and a downwardly mobile, angry base. The source argues that this exact dynamic, this massive gap between expectation and reality, is what's driving this political shift. That brings us to Section 2, two competing economic visions. To explain this modern crisis, the video steps back into the 19th century, framing it as a clash of economic theories. On the left side of the argument, it defines the British or Marxist system. According to the source, figures like Karl Marx and British Empire founder David Urquhart shared a hatred for the middle class, believing in a permanent, inevitable war between capital and labor, or essentially a return to feudalism. On the right, the analysis methodically contrasts this with what it calls the American system, championed by figures like Abraham Lincoln and his economist Henry Carey. This system, the video argues, is based on a natural harmony of interests between labor and capital, entirely fueled by human creativity and upward mobility. The analysis then traces a historical lineage from these older theories right to modern political coalitions. It jumps to 1997, claiming that UK Prime Minister Tony Blair and US President Bill Clinton fused their respective parties to create a third way. The source argues this echoes how British Fabians historically used socialism as a political safety valve. And here's the kicker: it claims this 1990s political shift is exactly what paved the path for modern globalism, specifically pointing to the World Economic Forum, setting the stage for its larger claims about outsourcing the American industrial base. Moving right along to Section 3, reviving the American system. Here, the source pivots from historical problems to what it views as modern solutions. The video points to the Trump administration's focus on domestic manufacturing as the literal revival of that American system. It highlights a quote from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, emphasizing a huge shift away from service and government jobs and a pivot toward productive jobs, basically making goods and building factories right here at home. $40 billion. The narrative backs up its claim with this massive figure, asserting that over the course of just 18 months, the administration approved more than 160 minerals deals worth $40 billion. The stated goal here, according to the analysis, is to aggressively counter foreign control of mines and bring resource production back to American hands. Okay, let's move to and see how this builds into a specific case study. The source traces a step-by-step example of how deregulation led to rapid nuclear innovation. Step 1. The administration ends regulations that previously banned nuclear expansion. Step 2. This opens the doors to a flood of private investment. And Step 3. This directly allows an entrepreneur named Jacob DeWitt to build a full-scale pilot isotope reactor in Texas, the Groves reactor, in under a single year. To summarize the philosophy driving this revival, the video uses a quote from Lyndon LaRouche. The argument is that breaking out of systemic stagnation requires extraordinary, exceptional individuals who think totally outside the mainstream. The narrative explicitly argues that figures like Elon Musk or Donald Trump are required to break this stagnation, and as a consequence, they are hated by socialists and bureaucrats who serve the current order. And that brings us to the climax of the source's argument, Section 4, following the campaign money. We're going to walk through this timeline exactly as the source outlines it. It starts with that 1997 merger with British Fabians we talked about. Then, look at 2017. The Democratic Socialists of America, or DSA, left the Socialist International to join the Sao Paulo Forum. The video claims the shift is part of a strategy inspired by Fidel Castro to actively dismantle Western culture. Finally, the timeline points to 2025, noting the DSA officially removed the ban on communists from its bylaws. With all of that ideological groundwork laid out, the analysis zeroes in on its specific targets. We're impartially reporting the video's findings here, which investigates the funding behind two prominent DSA candidates, Zohran Mamdani in New York and Abdul El-Sayed in Michigan. The thesis is that their funding is definitely not coming from local grassroots supporters. Now, what's really interesting about this piece of data is the scale. $2 million. The source claims that two obscure individuals, identified as alumni of a tech company called AppLovin, donated a combined $2 million to a federal super PAC called American Priorities, which then heavily supported these exact candidates. And that's immediately followed up with a secondary figure, another $500,000. The source identifies this as coming from a third associate tied to that exact same tech company, Tariq Afkad Ahmad.
So you might be wondering, why does the source focus so heavily on AppLovin? Well, the analysis lays out a web of allegations connecting this company directly to Chinese capital in the CCP. It claims that back in 2016, a buyout of AppLovin by a Chinese-backed firm was explicitly blocked by the U.S. government. It further alleges that a top shareholder, Heo Tong, is tied directly to the Chinese Communist Party, and that his JP Morgan Chase accounts were actually shut down over strict compliance concerns.
The narrative then rapid-fires several more final funding allegations regarding a web of foreign and intelligence-related money. It claims Shanghai-based Neville Singham funds the DSA through front groups. It points to the Institute for Middle East Understanding, claiming its director formerly ran a CIA front program. It even alleges that candidate El-Sayed's father-in-law is tied to Muslim Brotherhood organizations in the U.S. Taking all these alleged data points together, the analysis delivers its ultimate thesis. It summarizes the whole situation as Beijing-adjacent capital laundered through Silicon Valley shell identities. The claim is that foreign money is purposefully funding extreme ideologies to split a major U.S. political party right down the middle. And just like that, we have reached the end of our map. The source weaves this incredibly complex web from 19th century economic theory through the frustrations of indebted college students, all the way to allegations of international shell funding. Which leaves us with a final, very provocative question derived from the narrative. Does foreign capital and hidden history actually drive today's deepest political divides? It is a fascinating structural argument to break down, regardless of where you personally stand. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer and for keeping your curiosity sharp. I will see you on the next one.